This day seemed ordinary. I wandered around the bookstore in search of something new to read. Suddenly, my eyes rested on the book, but at the same moment, someone else reached for the same cover. We met our eyes at the same time. His green eyes were full of surprise, but also a soft smile. He stepped back, gesturing that the book was mine, but I just laughed and offered to share. This moment seemed strange to me, as if I knew it before, although I saw it for the first time. After this strange meeting, he offered to drink coffee. I didn't expect such an invitation, but his calm voice and manner had something soothing about it. We sat down at a small table in a nearby cafe. He said that he works as a designer and always looks for inspiration in books. His words seemed so sincere that I began to share my passions. Our conversation dragged on, and I didn't even notice how time had passed. After coffee, we decided to take a walk in the park. The evening was warm, and the light of the setting sun enveloped everything around in a golden glow. He talked about his favorite places in the city, and I found myself wanting to know more about him. His voice was calm, but I felt that there was something more hidden behind his words, something that he was not yet ready to tell. The walk was perfect until it started raining. We didn't take umbrellas, so we hid under a big tree. The rain pattered on the leaves, and we stood side by side, laughing at this unexpected adventure. He took off his jacket and covered my shoulders with it. I gratefully looked at him, and I remember this moment more than all our conversations. There was a concern in his eyes that I did not expect to see. The next day, we met in his studio. He invited me to see his works, and I was impressed. His paintings were not just art. They told stories. His emotions were visible in every stroke of the brush, and it touched me. He explained how nature and the people he meets in life inspire him. I saw myself in some of his works and felt that I was becoming a part of his world. After we finished viewing his works, he offered me a view of the city from above. We climbed to the roof of one of the old buildings where a panoramic view of the evening city opened. Lanterns had already begun to illuminate the streets, and the dark blue sky was decorated with the first stars. He pointed to distant buildings and told stories related to these places. His voice was full of warmth, and his presence was calming. I felt like that moment stopped time, allowing just the two of us to enjoy the beauty of the world. The next day, I brought my notebook to his studio, determined to show my sketches. I didn't consider myself an artist, but I wanted to share what inspires me. He looked at my work carefully and then suggested that we create something new together. We started painting on a large canvas, each adding his own touch. His strokes were confident and energetic, while mine were more delicate and detailed. Together, we created something unique. In this process, I felt an even deeper bond emerging between us. That evening, we returned to the roof again. He brought a warm blanket, and I brought tea in a thermos. We sat together, watching the stars that slowly appeared in the dark sky. He began to talk about his childhood, how his father taught him to appreciate art. His voice was calm, but I could hear the nostalgia in every word. I shared my memories of the first attempts at drawing, when I used ordinary colored pencils. This evening was special. We revealed our innermost thoughts to each other. A few days later, we were working on a new project, but our ideas started to conflict. He wanted to try something radically new, while I insisted on keeping the traditional elements. The argument escalated quickly, and I felt frustrated. But instead of ignoring it, he suggested that we take a break and think about it. We both knew that these differences did not destroy us, but helped us grow. The evening ended with us sitting down together again, trying to find a compromise. After a busy day, he suddenly turned on the old gramophone, which was standing in the corner of the studio. Music filled the room, and he held out his hand to me. "Let's just dance," he said with a small smile. I hesitated only for a moment, but then I put my hand on his palm. We moved slowly, as if forgetting all our arguments. His embrace was warm, and I felt my anxiety gradually disappear. That moment reminded me why we work together, because we find harmony even in our differences. A few days later, he invited me to an art gallery to show an exhibition that inspired him at the beginning of his creative journey. The gallery was spacious, with high white walls on which works of art hung. He slowly led me from one painting to another, talking about the techniques the artist used and how they influenced his style. I listened, mesmerized not only by the paintings, but also by how deeply he understood art. His words brought life to every work, and I could see that for him it was more than just a hobby. It was his world. After the gallery, the weather changed and it started to rain. We decided not to hide, but to walk the streets of the city under the soft sound of drops. The rain made everything around so clean and alive. We laughed as the big drops fell on our faces, and I felt truly free for the first time in a long time. He took off his scarf and carefully draped it over my shoulders, even though he was already soaking wet. I looked at him, and at that moment I realized that everything seemed simpler with him. One day, when we were discussing a new idea for a project, he suggested going out of town. We packed a few sandwiches and went to a clearing in the woods. The sun was shining brightly, and there was only nature around us. We sat down on a warm blanket. He spread out the drawings that he wanted to discuss with me. When the wind picked up one of the leaves and carried it up, he ran after it, laughing. I looked at him and felt how every minute with him made my world a little warmer and brighter. That night, we sat by the fire, discussing our fears and dreams. His voice was soft, but every word penetrated deep into my heart. He told how, as a child, he was afraid that his work would not be recognized, and how this motivated him to work harder. I shared my failures and how often I doubted myself. This conversation became something more than just an exchange of ideas for both of us. It brought us closer. We began to understand that our fears make us stronger when we overcome them together. After many weeks of working together, we organized an exhibition of our work in a small gallery. It was the first exhibition where our works were presented together. People would come and stop by the paintings and talk about how our styles complement each other. He held my hand as we walked through the gallery together, and I felt his presence give me confidence. As the evening drew to a close, one visitor said, "Your works show that art is not only about technique, but also about the soul." I knew that we would remember this moment forever. The next morning, after the exhibition, he unexpectedly appeared at my door with a large package in his hands. His smile was warm, but slightly sly. "I know how much you love to draw, so I thought this would come in handy," he said, handing me the gift. I opened the package and saw a set of expensive paints and brushes. My heart was filled with gratitude. He watched my reaction carefully, and I could see that it was important for him to know that this gift meant something to me. "Thank you," I whispered. It was more than just a set of paints. It was a gesture that showed how deeply he understood me. He offered to go to the lake to find new ideas for our works. The water was as calm as a mirror, and the sky was reflected in its surface, creating the illusion of infinity. We sat down on a wooden pier, holding notebooks. His movements were quick and decisive as he drew the contours of nature, and I tried to catch the moment of the play of light on the waves. This walk was not only about art, it was a moment of union with nature and each other. I realized that we both found our inspiration here. That night I worked on a new painting, but nothing came of it. My hand froze with each stroke, and I felt myself losing faith in myself. He entered the room, seeing my disappointed eyes. "You judge yourself too harshly," he said, sitting down next to her. His voice was calm but supportive. He took one of the brushes and made a few light strokes on my canvas, adding colors that I hadn't even noticed before. "Look, sometimes you just have to start over." He smiled. His words and gesture restored my confidence. A few days later, our latest work together was completed and we decided to celebrate. He offered to cook dinner together. We laughed while cooking, and I realized that even such simple moments become special when we are together. When dinner was ready, we sat down at the table with soft music playing in the background. He raised his glass and said, "For our team and for all the dreams that we will fulfill." This moment was filled with warmth, and I realized how important it is to have someone with whom you can share not only successes, but also daily joys. After dinner, we headed out to the balcony to enjoy the night sky. The air was cool, and he carefully threw a blanket over me. "Look, there are especially many stars today," he said, pointing to the sky. We were silent, enjoying this moment. I felt the whole world freeze, leaving only the two of us and the endless space above us. His hand touched mine, and I realized that these moments are more important than any words. We were part of something bigger, and that feeling gave us the strength to move forward. One day, he suggested going to the mountains to find new ideas for our creativity. We climbed a narrow path surrounded by tall trees that whispered in the wind. His voice echoed nearby as he talked about how nature had always helped him find balance. At the top, a picture opened that left me speechless. Endless forests covered with a light haze and distant mountains lost in the horizon. He was standing next to me, and I could see this landscape reflected in his green eyes. At that moment, I realized that nature was part of his soul. After returning home, we started working on a new project, but something went wrong. His ideas seemed too experimental, and I felt they didn't fit our style. We argued, each insisted on his own. It was our first serious conflict, and I didn't know how to resolve it. He left the studio, leaving me alone. I looked at his unfinished work for a long time, realizing how much it meant to him. At that moment, I understood that our art is not only about technique, but also about the ability to hear each other. The next morning, he returned to the studio. His voice was quiet as he said, "I didn't mean to offend you." I nodded, feeling how important those words were. We decided to try a new approach, to combine our ideas, to find a compromise. Working together helped us understand that our conflicts are just a way to something bigger. When the last smear was done, we looked at the result. It was something new and beautiful, born from our opposites. After a busy day, he offered to return to the place where it all began, the bookstore. We sat by the shelves, looking at the books and sharing our favorite passages. He showed me an old book that inspired his first big project. "She reminds me of the importance of following your dreams," he said, and his words made me think. I saw how the light from the lamp illuminated his face, and I realized that this place will always be a symbol of the beginning of something beautiful for us. We went to a hill outside the city where you could see the sunset. He told stories from his childhood, how his grandfather taught him to see beauty in simple things. His voice was calm and his look thoughtful. I listened to him and then shared my memories of how I first discovered art. The sun was slowly disappearing behind the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of gold and pink. We were sitting next to each other, and I felt that this moment would become one of those that you want to keep in your heart forever. Winter came and the city was covered with a white blanket of snow. He invited me for a walk to a local park to be inspired by winter nature. We walked along quiet, snowy paths, leaving footprints in the loose snow. His scarf was wrapped around his neck, and his breath turned into a light steam. He joked about how snow changes the world. And I laughed, feeling that his words really meant something. At some point, he plucked a few twigs from the Christmas tree and handed them to me like a bouquet. The simplicity of his gestures always touched me. After the walk, we returned to the studio, where it was warm and cozy. Our paints and brushes were already on the table. He suggested creating a joint winter picture. We worked together, adding various details: snow-covered trees, soft shadows, and the pale light of the winter sky. His strokes were bold and mine were thin and delicate, but together they created harmony. When the painting was finished, I looked at it and felt that it was not just our work, but a part of ourselves frozen in time. One evening, he invited me to a winter fair in the city center. The light of the garlands illuminated everything around, creating a fairy tale atmosphere. We held hot chocolate in our hands, and laughter and music rang out around us. He offered to go ice skating, and although I wasn't very good at it, his support made the experience unforgettable. He held my hand as I slid across the ice, and his laugh was so genuine that I forgot all my insecurities. This evening remained in my memory as one of the warmest moments of the winter. After the fair, he invited me to his house for dinner. His apartment was cozy and warm, with the soft light of lamps and the aroma of cinnamon wafting from the kitchen. He prepared a simple but delicious dinner for us, and we sat at the table and talked about our dreams and plans. His voice was so calm, and I could feel all my worries disappear. He suddenly said, "I'm glad we met. You changed my life." These words were unexpected, but very sincere, and I realized how important we are to each other. After dinner, we went to the roof of his house to look at the city covered in snow. He stood next to me, wrapping me in a warm blanket that he had brought with him. "I've always loved the view, but now it seems more special," he said, looking up at the snowy rooftops and twinkling lights. I nodded silently, staring at the horizon. The snow began to fall, quietly covering us and everything around us. This moment was like a dream in which there is nothing extra, just us and the infinite world around us. The next day, he suggested visiting the Museum of Modern Art. This place was his favorite, and I understood why. Each exhibit exuded uniqueness, reflecting not only the skill, but also the soul of the artist. We stood together next to an abstract sculpture that seemed to express a whole story. "If you look long enough, you can feel her emotions," he said, his voice quiet but full of passion. I listened to him and felt a desire to see the world through his eyes. After the museum, we came across a small antique shop. His attention was drawn to an old camera in a shop window. "I used to have one like that," he said, picking up the camera. I saw a spark in his eyes, a memory of something important. He decided to buy a camera, and the very next day we went to the park to take some pictures. I watched as he carefully adjusted the frame, and I realized that this camera is not just a tool, but a door to his past. In the park, he took pictures of everything: leaves swirling in the wind, children laughing, and even my face as I looked at him. "Real moments are what we have to preserve," he said, showing me the footage. I looked at his photos and saw not just pictures, but emotions that he was able to preserve. His view through the lens was special, and I understood why art was so important to him. This day became a lesson for me, to appreciate every moment. A few days later, he took me to a place I had never heard of. It was a small gallery hidden in one of the narrow streets of the city. "This place is special to me," he said as we entered. The gallery was filled with the works of young artists who conveyed their boldest ideas. He told how this gallery once gave him his first chance to show his works to the world. I felt how important this place was to him, and I understood that this is where his journey into art began. On the way back from the gallery, it started to rain. We did not hurry, but walked slowly, listening to the drops hitting the umbrella. "When I first showed my work in that gallery, I was afraid that I wouldn't be understood," he admitted. I looked at him, seeing the light of the street lamps reflected in his eyes. "And now?" I asked. He smiled and said, "Now I know that the most important thing is to just create." Those words stayed with me, reminding me that art is the freedom we have inside. The next morning, he appeared in the studio with important news. "We have been invited to present our work at an international exhibition," he said with a twinkle in his eye. I couldn't believe it at first. It was more than just an opportunity. It was a dream we were working toward together. He showed me the official invitation, and I could see how much it meant to him. We began to plan which pictures we would take with us, and I realized that this moment will forever remain in our memories. The days before the exhibition were tense. We packed paintings, checked documents, and he insisted that everything be perfect. "This is our chance to show the world what we can do," he said, his voice firm but full of warmth. I helped him, feeling the excitement wash over us. Our paintings were more than just works. They were parts of our lives, our shared moments. I knew that this exhibition would be not only a step forward in our work, but also a confirmation of our journey together. We arrived in a new town, and he suggested we take a walk to get a feel for its atmosphere. The streets were full of lights and life. Every corner seemed familiar, yet new at the same time. We stopped at a small cafe where he ordered tea. "This place reminds me why I love to travel," he said, looking at the people passing by. I listened to him and felt that our plans and dreams were becoming even closer. This evening was quiet, but full of meaning. A moment before the big day. The big day has come. The gallery was huge, and our paintings took center stage. He was standing next to me when the first visitors started to enter. "Don't worry, we did everything we could," he said, holding my hand. His words gave me confidence. People stopped by our works, discussed them, took notes. One of the critics even approached us to praise the harmony that permeated each picture. I looked at him, and at that moment, I realized that we had achieved something important. After the exhibition, we returned to the hotel. He offered to drink tea, and we sat on the balcony, watching the city at night. "It was a tough day, but it was worth every effort," he said, his voice calm. I gazed into the flickering lights and felt peace filling every cell. He looked at me and added, "You made it possible." His words made me realize how much we have achieved together. This evening was a reminder that all our efforts lead to such quiet but precious moments. The next morning, before we were about to leave town, he brought me a small present. It was a book we picked out together in a bookstore when we first met. Inside, he wrote a few lines. "This book is a reminder of how our journey began." His gesture was simple but very meaningful. I looked at him and understood how deeply he valued what we had created together. At that moment, I felt that every detail in our story mattered. Returning home, we drove for a long time through picturesque landscapes. I couldn't take my eyes off the sunlit fields and the rivers flowing between the hills. He suggested stopping on one of the lawns to stretch out and enjoy the view. We sat on the grass watching the birds circling in the sky. "These moments are just as important as the great achievements," he said, breaking the silence. His words made me think about how important it is to enjoy not only the results, but also the journey itself. When we returned home, the studio greeted us with a silence that seemed strange after the busy days of the exhibition. He went in first, opening the window to let in some fresh air. "This place is our stronghold," he said, surveying the room. I felt these words come to life in the walls filled with our work. We began to unpack the paintings, and I realized that each of them was now filled with new meanings that we brought from the exhibition. The studio came alive again, but now with the feeling of something bigger. A few days after his return, he proposed a new project. "I want to create something that is not only about us, but also about how we see the world," he said, showing off his sketches. His idea was to create a series of works that would reflect the beauty of simplicity. Nature, everyday life, invisible moments that stay with us forever. I was fascinated by his idea, and we began to discuss how to implement it. It was the beginning of a new path, and I felt that something completely new was being born. One morning, he woke me up at dawn. "Let's go," he said with a smile. We headed to the old bridge where the sun was starting to rise over the river. The sky shimmered with shades of pink and gold, and the water reflected this light like a mirror. He held the camera, capturing every moment. "This is something I want to keep forever," he said quietly as he showed me the footage. I looked at him and understood that these moments are real art that we create together. When we arrived in Paris for our joint exhibition, I was amazed by the scale of the event. The exhibition was held in one of the largest museums of modern art. Visitors from all over the world passed by our paintings, and I felt how our art expanded and found new horizons. He stood by, his gaze calm but deeply satisfied. "It's not just our success, it's what we created together," he said. And I knew the moment meant as much to him as it did to me. After the exhibition, we returned to the studio, and I felt the emotions from the event gradually recede. There was silence between us, but it was not a void. It was a silence filled with understanding and peace. He walked over to my desk, gently placed his hand on mine, and said, "Do you see how far we've come?" I nodded, and we sat side by side in silence, looking at our works. This moment became for me a symbol of how we grow together, even through silence. One evening, when we were sitting on the balcony after a long day at work, he shared his thoughts about the future. "We're not done yet. This is just the beginning," he said, looking out over the night city. His voice was calm, but I felt that these words were not just a promise, but a deep conviction. I squeezed his hand and answered, "Yes, together." We stared in silence at the light that flickered far below, feeling our plans continue to evolve like the paintings we create. A few weeks after the exhibition, we received an offer to go abroad again, this time to organize individual exhibitions. It was a chance we couldn't miss. We began to prepare, choosing the best jobs and planning how to present ourselves in the new city. All our past achievements became the basis for this big step, and I felt how it became another milestone in our joint journey. He came up to me and said, "Are you ready?" I looked into his green eyes and answered, "Yes, ready." We arrived in a new city, and I was fascinated by its grandeur. Streets filled with history, ancient buildings that silently stared at us, and new people we met at every turn. The exhibition went well, and we received the first enthusiastic reviews. After the opening, we walked the night streets, looking at the light reflecting off the buildings. He stopped, looked at me, and said, "This is just the beginning of our journey." I smiled and answered, "We haven't seen everything yet." After the first success in the new city, we woke up early to start the day with new energy. He prepared breakfast, and we sat on the small balcony overlooking the city. "This is why I love these trips," he said, placing a cup of tea in my hands. I smiled and felt my heart fill with gratitude. With him, I felt that all the difficulties of the past did not matter. We were together, and that was enough to move forward. We went to the local market to learn about local traditions. The town was full of people selling everything from fruit to antiques. He carefully selected several paintings that he thought were suitable for our new exhibition. I tried to capture the spirit of this place, keeping every detail in my heart. The market was alive and bright, and I could feel how these new experiences, like new colors, became part of our new stage in life. After a few weeks, we decided to change the direction of our creativity. He suggested that he should engage in the creation of more abstract works that could convey emotions, and not just the appearance. I was wary at first, but his confidence and calmness helped me open up to this new direction. We started experimenting with colors, textures, and materials. Every stroke and every idea became part of our new journey in art. And I realized that despite all the difficulties, this path was the right one for both of us. One evening, we went to an art studio where other artists had gathered to share experiences. It was a place where we could not only show our work, but also get feedback from those who share our passion for art. The evening was full of emotions, discussions, and creative ideas. I looked at him as he communicated with other artists, and I felt proud that I was next to him. This moment showed me how much we have already achieved, and how much more is still to come. We received the first large orders after the exhibition, and it was a real breakthrough. Our works began to be sold, and new opportunities opened up before us. We spent the evening of that day in his studio celebrating our victory. He looked at me and said, "We did this together." I couldn't help but smile because those words reflected everything we had been through together. This moment became our real success, not just creatively, but also personally. We began to understand that the real victory is to be together, to support each other in all endeavors. A few weeks after the big win, we received an invitation from one of the prestigious galleries in London. It was another big step for us, and even though I was worried, he remained calm and confident. "We will do it. Just remember we're doing this together," he said as we packed up the robots for shipping. These words sounded like a manifesto, and I felt my doubts gradually disappear. All our preparation had led to this moment, and I was ready for new challenges. London greeted us with its grandeur and boundless energy. We felt that this city could give us new opportunities. The gallery show was a huge success, and we met some important people who were interested in our work. I felt a new door open, and even though I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of this event, his presence by my side kept me grounded. He took my hand, and we stood together in front of our paintings, feeling our art become part of something bigger. After the exhibition, we went for a walk around London at night. The streets were filled with light, and people never seemed to stop. We walked on bridges where the water reflected the light of the lanterns, and every step sounded like music. He took my hand, and we walked in silence, feeling the magic of the moment. On this night, London became not just a city for us, it became part of our common journey, an important milestone in our history. We knew there were many more nights like this to come. After a busy week in London, we decided to take a break and go on a little vacation to a lakeside village. This place was ideal for regaining strength and finding new ideas for creativity. We woke up early, watching the first rays of the sun touch the surface of the lake. The silence was broken only by the sounds of birds and a light breeze. He would come up to me with a cup of tea and ask, "What do you think we can create in this place?" I looked at him and felt that we were finding our way again, wherever we were. That morning, after a few days of rest, we sat together on the terrace. He looked at me with a serious expression on his face. "I think we are ready for the next step. We create not only art, but also our future together," he said. I was touched by his words. These few simple phrases changed everything. We started talking about how we will develop our careers, how we will take steps towards the next big exhibitions. This moment was the beginning of a new chapter in our shared history. I realized that now we are together not only in art, but also in life. After several successful exhibitions, we got the opportunity to exhibit our works in New York. It was an incredible achievement, and although I was filled with excitement, he remained calm. "This is a chance we couldn't pass up," he said as we went over the details of the event together. I was scared. New York seemed like such a huge stage, and we were just two artists. But he took my hand and said, "We are not just artists, we are creators, and this world is ready to hear us." His words restored my confidence, and I felt that we were ready. Before the trip to New York, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were filled with anxiety. Would we survive such a big scene? I sat on the windowsill and looked at the night city. He entered the room and, seeing me, sat down next to me. "Are you worried?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He smiled and hugged me. "This is just another step on our journey. We will do it together." His support was always my protection. At that moment, I realized that we are not alone. We are together. When we first arrived in New York, the city struck us with its energy and scale. The streets were crowded with people, and the skyscrapers seemed endless. The exhibition was held in one of the most famous museums, and when we entered the gallery, I was amazed. Our paintings looked so small among other masterpieces. He noticed my doubts and smiled. "Don't worry, they will appreciate our view of the world." I looked into his green eyes, full of confidence, and I knew that we were ready for this challenge. The exhibition brought new opportunities. We were offered cooperation with major galleries around the world. But despite the successes, we remained true to our principles. Art is not just about exhibitions, it's about what we feel and convey, he said as we worked on the new paintings. His words helped me stay grounded, regardless of everything that was happening around me. We both knew that the real meaning of our work was our ability to convey emotions, not just to receive recognition. A few months after the exhibition, we started discussing where to go next. "We've done everything we can, but there's still a lot to do," he said, laying out sketches for a new series of paintings. I nodded and added, "We have to create something that will be important to us, not to other people's eyes." These words became our new goal. I felt our story take on a new meaning. It was a journey not only through art, but also through our souls. We started working on a new project, a series of paintings that were supposed to reflect the emotions we experienced together. It was a challenging process because every picture was important, and we needed to create something that would resonate not only with us, but with other people as well. He often came to me, taking my brush and offering his opinion on how best to express a certain emotion. And although we did not always agree, every step we took was a step towards achieving harmony. After several weeks of hard work, we went for a walk outside the city. The evening was beautiful. The sky was clear and the stars were shining brightly, adding to the special atmosphere. We walked side by side, taking our time, enjoying the silence. He talked about his deepest thoughts, and I listened, looking into his face. At that moment, it seemed to me that everything around me froze, and I just listened to him, feeling how a new level of trust and understanding was growing between us. One of the evenings, when I doubted my art, he came to me with the words, "I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." His simple but powerful words dispelled my doubts. I felt how his faith in me gave me the strength to move forward. Art became not only a way of expression, but also a way through the difficulties we overcame together. I knew that with him, I would be able to overcome any barriers. After a few weeks, our project began to gain momentum. The paintings we created together began to arouse great interest among visitors. People who came to exhibitions stayed with our works longer than we expected. One evening, he said, "We have achieved what we dreamed of." I looked at our paintings and felt how our energy, our emotions, our joint efforts were embodied in these works. This was our real breakthrough. That night, after the exhibition, we sat on the balcony again, But this time I felt that our life had entered a new phase. "We'll do more," he said, looking out over the night city. I nodded, but at that moment I knew that the most important thing was not the achievement, but that we were together. We have achieved what we could not even dream of a few years ago. But now, looking into each other's eyes, I understood. Our future will be as big as our dreams. Despite our achievements, I began to feel insecure. After a large number of exhibitions and successes, I began to wonder, is it all real? Is it just me? Or is this just part of a larger mechanism? He noticed my anxiety and came over as I sat in the studio looking at an unfinished painting. "You ask yourself, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing?" he said, and I nodded. "But you already do," he added, extending his hand to me. There was a simple but important truth in his words. We had already found our way, and that was the main thing. That night he took me for a walk on the beach. The sails went far in the dark and the sea was as calm as our hearts. We were silent until he stopped and said, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and you should not doubt what you're doing. We are together, and that's important." His words were gentle but strong. I looked into his green eyes and felt my confidence return. We walked along the shore, and I knew that together we would overcome everything. After returning home after a beach walk, we started working on a new project, which was to become not just a series of paintings, but a whole artistic expression of our experiences. He suggested using non-standard materials to create something unique. I was ready to experiment, and we began to create new, exciting works, combining colors, textures, and even natural elements. This project became special for us because it combined everything we experienced together. After several weeks of work, we sent our new paintings to an exhibition held in one of the major art centers. The first feedback we got was incredible. Critics and visitors praised our works for their emotionality and depth. I stood next to him and watched people talk about our work. He caught my look and said, "We made it together." This moment was one of the greatest achievements because each painting was part of our journey together. After the exhibition, we sat together on the roof, surveying the night city. He was looking at me and I knew he wanted to say something. "I think we have to create more than just art," he said. I didn't ask what exactly he meant, but his words left a deep impression. I knew we were on the verge of something bigger, and I was ready to walk this path with him. A few weeks after the exhibition, we received an invitation to a masterclass for young artists. The location of the event was incredible. An old villa on the outskirts of Paris, surrounded by green gardens and fruit trees. It was not only an opportunity for us to share our experience, but also to find new sources of inspiration. After the workshop, we were walking in the garden, where he said, "Have you ever thought that true inspiration is not only found in art, but also in life?" I nodded and understood that these words opened a new path for us. One evening, when we were sitting in the studio, he unexpectedly spoke about his past. "I was always afraid that I would never find my way," he said. I looked at him and there was so much depth, so much history in his words. "But now you've found him," I replied. He smiled and added, "I have found not only a path, but also a person with whom I am ready to walk it." I felt those words sink into my heart, and we looked at each other in silence, realizing how far we had come together. That night, we started working on a new series of paintings combining everything we had experienced together. I painted, and he supplemented my works with his details. It was our way of embodying our shared experiences, our history, which we have experienced from the moment we met until today. In each painting, we left a part of ourselves, a part of our dreams and hopes. Every stroke, every color became an important element of this new journey for us. A few months later, our works received their first major award. It was more than just recognition. It was the moment when we realized that our work had paid off. When we received the award, he held my hand and said, "This is our victory together." I looked at him and realized that this moment is not just a reward for work, but the result of our joint journey, our doubts and achievements. We have achieved something great, and this was just the beginning. After that evening, we went for a walk around the city as usual, but this time I felt that we were on the verge of something bigger. We went back to the studio where I started painting a new painting again while he worked on his. And although we both felt that life was not standing still, we knew that this was a new phase. The feeling of change and a new beginning was in every touch of the brush, in every look at each other. We started working on a project that became a symbol of our journey together. One evening, after we finished work on another project, we sat in the studio watching the darkness gradually cover the city. He turned to me with a smile and said, "This is the moment when we can stop and realize what we have achieved." I nodded silently, looking at our works, and felt how much we had already gone through together. All these months, exhibitions, doubts, and joys merged into one. We had a common goal, and each step brought us closer to it. A few days later, he looked at me with a serious look and said, "We have achieved a lot, but we still have a long way to go. What do you think about the next step?" I thought for a minute, and an idea flashed in my head. We decided to start a new project, a series of paintings that would tell not only about us, but also about how we see the future. We both understood that this project would change us and our creativity. He squeezed my hand, and I felt the energy of our shared dream fill up again. We headed east to find inspiration for our new series of paintings. The place we chose was spectacular. Old temples, green hills, and a sense of peace that filled everything around. It was difficult to describe how this place affected us, but I felt how every breath of this air gave new ideas. We spent several days among this nature, and he, looking at me, said, "This place helps me understand how important it is not only to see, but also to feel." I smiled, feeling how we are becoming closer not only through words, but also through shared experiences. After returning home, we started working on new paintings, using inspiration from Oriental landscapes and feelings. Ideas began to intertwine, and each stroke of paint told a story about what we had experienced. We were creating something new, and each picture was like a new horizon. He looked at me as we finished the last job. "We were able to create what we feel," he said, his voice calm but full of emotion. I knew that we found another important stage in our journey, and this moment will remain in our memory. We received an invitation to an international art fair that was to take place next month. It was our chance to show not only our creativity, but also what we have achieved together. We had many moments of doubt as we prepared for the event, but each time he reminded me that we were doing this not just for the world, but for ourselves. "We're not just making art. We're making ourselves," he said as we looked at our paintings. I realized that every day with him was another step towards our new beginning, and I was ready to face this future with him by my side. We began to intensively prepare for the art fair that was to take place in a few weeks. Packing the paintings, preparing the presentation materials, everything was important, and each stage of the work required our full attention. He often checked every detail, making sure everything was perfectly prepared. "Now we are ready," he said as we finished the final preparations. I looked at him and felt how this path became not only our creative path, but also our life path. When we came to London for the art fair, I was amazed at the scale of the event. The city was full of people and the streets were full of life. The exhibition was held in one of the largest art centers, and we stood next to our paintings, watching people appreciate our work. He looked at me and said, "You know it's important not only to us, but to everyone who sees our work." It was the moment when I realized that our path is not just our paintings, but part of something bigger that connects us with other people through art. At the art fair, we had the opportunity to talk with several important collectors and art critics. One of them approached us and offered cooperation. We couldn't believe it happened so fast. I was standing next to him when he signed the contract, and at that moment I realized that everything we were doing now had a new meaning. "This is just the beginning," he said, looking at me. And I knew that with each step we were getting closer to our great goal. After the art fair, we spent a few days in London, enjoying the peace and quiet. He offered to see the old streets where we could just walk aimlessly. We passed old buildings, drank coffee in small cafes, and enjoyed moments together. At one point, sitting in a park, he said, "We made it because we were together. Our art is our stories, which we tell through paint." I looked at him, feeling that this moment was our real victory. After returning home, we sat down together and began to discuss our next steps. "We have to move on. This is a new phase for us," he said as we sat in our studio. I looked at him and understood that we are ready to create something new again. Art has become for us not just a way of self-expression, but also a way to the future. We'll create, because that's what we do best, I said, and he smiled, knowing that we would continue on this journey together. We went on a trip around the world, looking for new sources of inspiration for our paintings. Ideas for new works began to emerge during travels. We visited Japan, where ancient temples and modern metropolises merged into a single unique picture. It was a place that revealed to us the depths of peace and chaos, tradition and innovation. He said, "Everything you need for creativity is here. Art is in every corner of this city." I looked at him and felt how this place made us even closer. In Tokyo, we met several local artists whose work was inspired by cultural changes and the interweaving of old and new. They showed us their work and it inspired us. We started working together on several projects, exchanging ideas and influences. It was a great opportunity to expand our horizons. He said, "Creativity knows no bounds, and we must open ourselves up to new influences." I felt that it was really important to be ready for change. After several months of traveling, we returned home. The studio, which once seemed to us a familiar place, now looked like a sanctuary. We put new sketches, new ideas on the table, and our hearts were filled with new emotions. "We're home," he said, standing in front of one of the new paintings. I looked into his eyes and realized that we are ready to create something great together again. After several months of work on new projects, our paintings were awarded an international award. We received an invitation to a large gallery in Paris, where our series of paintings was presented alongside the works of the world's best artists. It was a moment we had been waiting for a long time. When we got the award, he looked at me and said, "It's not just our victory. It's the victory of everyone who believes in us." I smiled, knowing that our journey was just beginning. After the award, we sat down together and started planning our next steps. This was our new chapter, and we were ready for new challenges. He said, "Now we can create without limits." I looked at him and felt how our partnership is strengthening, how we are moving forward together. Our art has become a reflection not only of what we have experienced, but also of what lies ahead. We didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew one thing. We would be together. A few weeks after returning home, we started preparing for a new exhibition, but this time we decided to approach the work in a new way. We not only chose a new topic, but also started experimenting with different techniques and materials. "It's going to be something completely new," he said, laying out the new sketches in front of me. I looked at his work and felt how new perspectives are emerging. Our creative paths continued to intertwine, and every day brought new ideas. We decided that at the next exhibition, we will present a joint project. Not just a series of paintings, but a whole story. This was a new stage in our art, and we planned each stage carefully. We faced challenges along the way, but every time I was overwhelmed or disappointed, he reminded me that true art is not only about creating, but also about overcoming obstacles. We worked together, and that made our work even more meaningful. Our joint project began to gain new dimensions. We decided to add installation elements to our works to convey the atmosphere we encountered during our travels. The studio was filled with various materials, fabrics, natural elements, light. "Art must interact with the viewer," he said as we set up the first pieces of the installation. I felt how our every stroke, every idea brought us closer and closer to what we want to convey to the world. Our project was presented at an international exhibition of contemporary art, and we felt that it was more than just a picture exhibit. People from all over the world came to see our work, and we received a lot of positive feedback. One critic said, "This is art that not only shows, but also conveys feelings." I looked at him and he smiled. "This is who we are. These are our emotions, and we have conveyed them through this art." This was our victory, and we knew we wouldn't stop there. After the exhibition, we sat together on the terrace, watching the city at night. At that moment, I realized that we had done everything we had ever dreamed of. "Do you know that now we can create not only for ourselves?" he said. I looked at him and we both knew that our journey was not over. We were just beginning to open new horizons for our art, and together we could do even more. I smiled at him, knowing that with him I could achieve anything. We went to Venice to get new impressions for our works. The city on the water, with its narrow streets, ancient bridges, and gondolas, became for us not only a place to relax, but also a source of inspiration. Venice reflected all the colors of the world, and every moment was filled with emotion. We wandered the streets, stopped by the water, and he said, "Art is not only what we see, but also what we feel." And I felt how this city changes us. After several weeks of impressions and new ideas, we returned home with new projects. He was sitting in his favorite place in the studio, looking at new sketches. "Now we can create something that will leave a mark," he said, looking at me. I wasn't sure what he meant, but his words made me want to do something real and memorable. We started working on new paintings, and every stroke of the brush felt important. Every stroke part of a larger story. I realized that now we are not just artists. We are creators of our own heritage. After many months of work, evenings spent together in the studio, as well as travels and creative explorations, we finally finished our big project. It was a series of paintings that combined all stages of our journey, from momentary emotions to deep experiences and global inspirations. Each painting was a part of our shared history, our dreams and doubts. We stood in the studio, examining the works. He turned to me with a smile. "This is our biggest project, and we created it together." I felt proud of everything we had achieved, but I also realized that this is just the beginning for us.